Okay, let's see here. Welcome to the dojo. Hope everybody's doing well. Popping out that shadow. Always on top. Just like I like it. No pun intended. Oh. What am I doing right now? So in preparation for like working on pathfinding, I'm undoing a previous idea for a mechanic. I already commented out and got rid of a lot of that code already, but long story short, the old code was kind of like an emulation of Final Fantasy XII's Gambit system. I was calling them tactics, but to simplify things, I'm going to implement this idea of a default action. So in other words, we'll be able to create very simple mappings of like enum integers to different default actions that an entity might take, which will end up being kind of useful for testing. For instance, being able to define a entity action default that would tell a entity to simply move from point A to point B, where point A and point B are defined in a way where we can say point A is that entity's location, and then point B is some other arbitrary point that the entity might want to travel to. And in traveling to that point, we have to generate a path, hence pathfinding. So there's a reason for everything. Let's take a look at game state. Right now we're hard coding in random movement. You can see a lot of commented out code that I've already written. It's still here because it may or may not still be useful. But in any given moment when I have large blocks commented out still in the code base like this, it's because I haven't decided that I'm done with it yet. When I'm really done with it, when I really decided that something does not belong here anymore, that's when it gets removed. But up until that point, sometimes, like for instance, these random else statements might contain little error codes that I just don't want to have to rewrite. Because obviously, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We'll count the spaces. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. "45 characters versus..." Like, I don't want to have to retype all of that, right? So obviously, leave it in until you know you're done with it. That's why this is the development branch, right? So my code ends up kind of like a graveyard of ideas. But out of that graveyard grow beautiful plants. That's the idea, you know? So for instance, if we wanted to encapsulate this into its own case, right? We could call this random move. So now the expectation is like when we go to check to see what the default action on a given entity that we're working with is. In this case, it'd be entity ID. So we could do something like auto default action equals a dog who's off the blanket. Why do you ask that question? Seems like you're trolling. The people who are like, oh, you don't need C++, it's like, no. The way that my component system worked, I actually swapped back to C++. And I even have previous videos where I've explained this. So I'm not going to take time to answer that or dignify that with an answer, right? It's a long answer, the kind of long answer that you're probably not looking for. It's not just one simple thing, and it's such a distraction from me actually moving forward. I'm not trying to be offensive, but if you are genuinely asking, maybe it's because you're too young to know the difference between the two, or something to that effect. But the people who typically ask that kind of question or talk about it on like Twitter are the kind of C programmers who, like myself, might have been young and headstrong, thinking that they could get away with not using the STL or not using templates or something to that effect. But attempting to replicate like template behavior in pure C is actually fucking atrocious. It's a ridiculous, goddamn, like, ludicrous thing. Because I've actually helped at least one student go through that process, and let me tell you, it's a lot of void pointers. All right, it's a lot of struct management. It's a lot of bullshit that, like, when you go back to C++ and you understand how the template system works and why and how C++ emerged out of C, because really, at the end of the day, C++ can't exist without C, because C used C in order to implement C++ in itself in the beginning. You know, like a lot of the fundamental like points was to like make doing certain crazy generic actions a lot easier. Like as an example of this, let me just show you, dude. Jesus Christ. You people. Okay, you're obviously a troll. I'm going to actually how do I properly do this? You are in a 24-hour timeout because I tell people not to ask that because it's in the video title. It's in the thumbnail. Like it's actually in the thumbnail. And you come in and you're like, what system are you doing? Like a fucking retard. You gotta be a little bit more like if you have to ask that question, that tells me you're not ready. You know what I mean? Like, you have to work on yourself first. You can't put that burden onto other people, because that's on you. And asking that question here will just get an instant timeout. I'm not playing. I don't have time for that shit. I'm trying to actually work here. The reason that you want C++ for this, basically, long story short, is because the component table ends up only being 83 lines of code. Whereas in pure C, implementing a hash map, one for every single different type that you want to handle whenever you want to like add a new component type. So like, let's say you're building components, you know, like the only other thing I have to do is whenever I want to add a new component, just add a few, like 4 lines of code for every component. It's really not that hard. And you know, I was able to, this is like pretty much the most that I've had to vibe code, was working out this thing. But I knew that it was possible, and here's how it works. It's a map of maps. It's a map to a shared pointer from a type index. And what you do is, I'll show you, because I actually have to do it right here. We're implementing a new component. This is actually why you want C++. All right, pay attention. So what you do is do ct.get entity default action for ID dot value, or entity default action none. That's why you want C++. Pure C is a nice thing. It's kind of a pipe dream for certain things, though. In certain cases, you will recognize the utility of having higher level tools available to you. You don't want to have to re-implement like an array or a vector or some other resizable data structure every single time that you want to start a new project. That said, if you have any recommendations for things like C replacements for generic vectors or anything in the STL, maybe you know something I don't. Maybe it's that you can teach me something that I'm missing, because sometimes that's the case. But if that's not the case, then it might be a young and an inexperienced question. That's all. It just presupposes that C by definition is better, when if you work in C long enough, you will get to a point where you appreciate the fact that C++ exists. All right? But this is why you want C++. Because now I can get the default action that we're going to set whenever we go to create like a new entity. So here's how that works. When we go to create NPC, and we set starting stats, and then we let's see, then we set defaults, and in the setting of the defaults, what we can do here, ct.set entity default action ID, and then entity default action can be like random move, right? So that's the same random move that we're getting right here. So like during the logic step, when it's this entity's turn and we have to decide what this entity does this turn, we can get a default action that we've stored on the entity in our component system that we wrote in C++. Try writing that shit in C and see how many more lines of code you have to do to do that shit. Look, I picked up a book on C++ when I was 11 years old. I'm 40 now. I've been fucking with this stuff for about 30 years. Not saying anything other than that. there is a reason that people show up and listen sometimes. So if the action is entity default action none, we're going to do one thing. And then if it's random move, then we're going to do this stuff right here. And I am going to be right back. Okay. And we're back. So now effectively the entity should have the same behavior that it had just a minute ago, because all we're really doing now is checking to see what the default action is before we do anything. So if it ends up being none, we skip this if statement and we just return false, saying that we failed to handle the entity for some reason. Okay, so far so good. Yeah, and you probably see it as better because you think stripped down means more efficient. But trust me, C++ is the best of both worlds. You get all of the power of higher level languages with all of the expressiveness of C. I mean, there's really, like, not to mention, like, every C project will compile, generally speaking, maybe with, like, more warnings, maybe with a few things you have to fix, but most of the time, a C++ compiler will compile a C project. Just saying. All right, so paths, right? So if an enemy has a target ID, in other words, it's able to target like the hero. Then we're able to get like a location for that hero. And if, you know, we can generate a path. And that path could be like a vector. So the way that I've done this previously is by first defining a component. And we're going to call it target path. We already have a target ID. Next, we bring down these lines. And so, what is the target path? Well, it's a vector of vec3s. Now this actually, maybe it needs to actually be a shared pointer to a vector. So it's going to be a list of XYZ coordinates. I'm not even sure that we need this. All right, now the interesting stuff happens. This is where we're going to bust out something that I did in the past. I'm not proud of it, but this is where a lot of kids are going nowadays. You know, it's like writing this shit's hard. I remember the first time that I hand wrote Dijkstras. I don't even know how to pronounce that shit. Dijkstras, Dijkstras, Dijkstras. I forget, the J is silent. Uh-oh. What happened here? My X account has been locked. Oh no. Whatever shall I do? Damn. Banned for a whole fucking week. All right. Damn, I'm gonna need some more coffee here in a sec. I know all the kids like the vibe coding shit, right? This was, oh wow, that's really not bad. You like half a penny for that. So it's got now my gamestate.h, which is a pretty big fucking file. It's actually 3,500 lines of code, and that's not bad to start with. So All right, we will be right back again. We could use some music, right? All right. Making some more coffee. Just keeping an eye on Gracie. All right. Let's get back to it. Sub Scary Hutton. About to make some coffee. Okay, so if that's the case, we're actually gonna go back in and actually do that. Then in game state, when we go to create NPC, and set starting stats. We would do ct.set target path ID. Vector of vec3. All right, coffee acquired. Where did we leave off? Okay, so yeah, we're setting up stuff for the AI to do most of the legwork for us. Yo, what's up, Dulce? Hey, you need to chill out, baby. You've been on edge probably from all that cheese I just gave you. But we've been outside twice since I started streaming. We even went outside once before I started streaming. I moved you closer to me so that you can hear me talk. Well, we need you to chill out for a bit, because this next part's heavy duty. Okay, I wasn't able to figure out what I wanted from it next. So it looks like I still have some stuff I have to do here. So instead of just all right, so like ct.get target path ID. Oh. It's all right, my dog apparently needs to go back out. back again. All right. So where did we leave off? In all cases, we like want to clear the vectors, start fresh. Right, so if that's update path to target, right? Okay, so update path to target is where Aider is going to handle its focus now, right? Interesting. Okay, let's see how well it did that. Now, what's a node? Where's that coming from? Like, that's the kind of shit I'm talking about. Like, yeah, see, there's a ton of errors. Okay, so map was not declared in this scope. Okay. Oh, sick. Okay. Let's see if that works. Oh, fuck yeah. Okay, it compiled. It compiled and ran. We need to actually use what we just wrote here, though. So after we call update path to target, this is where I come in. path size is greater than 1, then we can assume that the next location we're going to move into is going to be path at 1. Like, for instance, if you're at 0, 0 and you want to move to 1, 1, or like if you're at 1, 1 and you want to move to 2, 2, right? It's going to be the difference between the next location and the current location. So like if you were at 2, 2 and you wanted to move back into 1, 1, 1 minus 2 is -1. So the movement vector that we would be passing would be like the difference between those, right? So if the path is not greater than 1, then the entity is going to not take any action because they could be at their intended destination. But in the very beginning, when we like first create we had this function make all NPCs target player just before current scene starts, right? That updates every NPC's thing to target the player just as a test. So one of the things that we want to do next not necessarily that, but whatever. Instead of doing random move, move to target. Now the moment of truth, right? We got Aider to implement something that we have to test now. We call Aider's code with update path to target, and it generated all this. It's pretty good, but I would definitely want to like maybe pull this out and like refactor it somehow at some point, but we're gonna test it out. Where the fuck does node even come from, by the way? Oh, it's an inline struct that we can just arbitrarily define. Interesting. So this is actually going to end up getting run on like every turn, which isn't, I guess, that bad to start with. It's not like getting called every frame or anything like that. All right, so Aider's actually still running. But here we go. Well, that's kind of interesting. It's finding its way to me, but he's violating serious move principles. The X and the Y for his move every turn shouldn't be that big. So I'm not sure if it's really, and not to mention he's like also like only moving like every 2 turns or 3 turns or something like that. He's supposed to be kind of coming at me once every turn. So there's a couple issues here. I'm not sure why we have to reverse, because I'm not sure what order we're starting from. Like, what is start? Okay, so we're actually starting from the ID and working our way to the target. So for some reason it decided to reverse. I'm not sure why. And maybe we actually did need to leave that in there. Oh, it actually doesn't call the start? Weird. Okay. That's a good sign. That's a good sign. It's actually a really good sign. We're not going to be able to thoroughly test it. Well, actually, we could. We could do some weird testing. Wait, what? Oh, whoops. There we go. Pathfinding test. Oh yeah, so Okay, well that's looking good so far. The editor I use is actually neovim. Believe it's in the thumbnail. One of the most common questions I get asked, so... Oh, don't ask why. Please don't. Because now you're going to get into this whole thing about Visual Studio Code, aren't you? It's like, why aren't you using the same thing as everyone else? It's like, why does anyone use any other tool or for any other reason other than they have a specific relationship? It's not always a very simple answer. That's like one of the most I get asked that so much, and it's like I want to flip it on it. Why don't you use neovim? Is it too hard? Does like learning Vim keystrokes like bronk your mind? Yeah, it bonked my mind the first time I got behind it too. That's par for the course. Not to mention, you've got Vim keystroke options in Visual Studio Code if you really want them. That's not why I don't use Visual Studio Code. I actually have a video on it. For you, it's hard for you. I've been using Linux for like over 20 years. I mean, you definitely have to learn some commands on Visual Studio Code. You can't just get in there and start writing. There's a lot of configuration that you have to do. Every environment requires some configuration. It's very rare outside of like very simple like interpreters where you can just sit down and start doing stuff. With C++, at least, you know, you can do things yourself. You're not like limited. And even then, like I had to learn a lot about neovim to catch up. I had to abandon Vim script entirely, and I had to pick up all this Lua bullshit just to be able to edit my fucking like code editor. Damn. But like, if you've been in the industry for long enough, you eventually come to realize that there's always going to be some new shit that you got to learn in order to kind of like catch up to like where the current state of things is at. Otherwise, you'd be operating like a dinosaur the rest of your life. So I feel like the experience of writing C and C++ is best experienced from the command line. Like, there's very little that an IDE gives you that you can't get on your own. You know, like, the point of, in my opinion, learning how to program isn't so that you could just bow down and submit yourself to all these higher order beings and entities that effectively rule and control your life. Like, for me, programming is about like mental liberation and being able to use my brain to solve problems. And if you're like actively being funneled down into a rabbit hole of a certain way of thinking, then that really kind of strips away your own autonomy and your own ability to make certain decisions about how you solve problems. One size does not fit all. And if we should learn anything about like the current vibe coding revolution, it's that tools are not the end all be all of productivity. How many years of experience do I have? So I started programming in 1997, I want to say. So just about 30 years, you could say 29. I began getting paid to actually help people in university in 2006. Like I that was my first like paid professional software experience. I've been freelancing for about 20, let's see, no, not 20, or wait, yes, no, we're coming up on 18 years of freelancing experience, which is, it's a good amount. Like, I've been freelancing longer than a lot of people have even been in the industry. Not to mention, the few years that I got to work in corporate, which was a blessing. One of my favorite times in life was actually being in those environments, because you learn so much from other people. It's just, it's really an environment where someone who's very hungry for growth can thrive. I miss those times. It depends on what you mean by experience. If you talk, how long I've been getting paid? 20 years. How long have I been writing software or working in code in general? Not necessarily paid experience, but like when I began to first write code at all, 30. Like, one of the things that you really could benefit from doing is installing Linux on a virtual machine, or if you're on Windows and you want to start kind of upgrading your own like programmer skill, you should definitely start fucking with Linux. And if you're on Mac OS, then you're kind of in a better spot than Windows people. But even then, if you don't want to do Linux in a virtual machine on Windows, you could also install the WSL2, which isn't as good as real Linux, but it's still not bad. It at least gives you something that you can play with. And if you don't want to do any Linux at all, but you're still looking to upgrade kind of your own skill, I would recommend like digging into PowerShell and some of the because honestly, the only reason that anyone should be fucking with Windows nowadays is because of red teaming and like vulnerability research, because Windows is incredibly fucked, and the top-down corporate monoculture that like pervades in society is one of the biggest reasons why we have so much software fuckery. It's the best way I can say it. Mental stamina, it's like, dude, you just have to start playing around with stuff. You just have to try new things. You have to be not afraid to play around a little bit, or just like experiment with some idea, verify why it doesn't work or why it does work, or, like whatever you got to do to kind of push something forward. And really, the point of college wasn't necessarily to teach you strictly like translatable real world skills in the same way that like boot camps advertise, right? One of the big things that college gave me was the ability to complete projects. By virtue of the fact that I got my diploma, suggests that, I was able to stick with something for long enough to see it to completion. And not just the degree itself, but all of the projects, every single homework assignment. That's a lot of shit. It's a lot of shit that most people don't want to hang around for 4.5 years or however long. You have to have a kind of mentality of being in it for the long haul. And most of the people on X and like on social media are not in things for the long haul. They're largely in the same way that like most modern gamers migrate from game to game. And very rarely do they have a game that they really stick with for, many years. You always got to be playing the newest and the greatest. In very much the same way, so too does society. Kind of like, you remember how like Zoom just kind of like came out of nowhere during the pandemic, when we already had like plenty of different video conferencing solutions up until that point. Why should we all have to pick up yet a new one? I had already been using like Google Meets and Google Hangouts for almost a decade at that point. But the point being is that, well, if they can recreate the wheel, then so can you. And you can take ownership over your own solutions. And you don't have to be a slave if there's some way of doing something that you don't particularly enjoy, or some sort of workflow that doesn't necessarily make you more productive, but you can trick yourself into thinking so. Because it's like, how often are you going to use all of the different features of your IDE, right? Like really, unless you're like a super senior engineer deep in some shit that's like very, very big and you're dealing with some really serious issues, like I can't tell you like how, it's like, okay, I used Xcode, the memory profiler, there's a lot of random stuff in there. I mean, part of it's largely marketing. You're absolutely right. But convenience is like, the heavyweight tools of an IDE are there if you need them. But I don't buy this argument that like every time people yell at me about like IDEs and whatnot, like their edge case argument is basically that, the tools are there if you need them. It's really what it comes down to. But that's not to say that like you have to, or that there's the only thing that you need. Like instantly, like just swapping instantly makes your shit more productive. That's not really how that works. Because a lot of that stuff you may just not ever need or never even use, possibly. And why force extra tools into your belt until you know that you need them? That's how I feel about it. I like my stuff stripped down when I can. But yeah, in general, like, there are some conveniences for the everyday average person. But you gotta understand that I've been coding since before Visual Studio Code even existed. I used Visual Studio like, I mean, it is very much like overfeeding an animal. It's like, the difference between an animal in the wild having to hunt and forage for its own food versus an animal who's just able to graze and feed easily and just get real fat and just ready for the slaughter. Meanwhile, one of those animals is going to survive out in the wild longer than the others, and the other doesn't know how much it has been robbed of its own livelihood in the long term. It thinks it's doing good in the moment because it's comfortable, but its hunter instinct edge gets dulled to a nub. Exactly. Well, okay, so the pathfinding works. That's the ultimate thing here, is that this is actually a step forward. It's probably a good time for me to take a break. I got more done today than I actually expected. Chess has been pretty fun, and I'm going to be doing a lot more chess. It's going to be a delicate balance between chess and this, because I do like getting better at chess. It's definitely a mental switch, and I'll probably do a little bit of chess off stream right now, actually, after I have something to eat. So I want to thank everyone for joining. Let me go ahead and nice. Appreciate you following your recommendations. Shoutouts to Cripple Late Night TV. Got more to come. Plenty more dev to be done. Till next time, everyone. Peace out.